a millionaire buried alive, was saved by a single dad. Her whispered words shocked them both. Imagine digging in the woods with your daughter and hearing someone screaming from underground. That's exactly what happened to Mark Chen, and what the woman whispered to him after he pulled her out changed both of their lives forever. Mark was a 34-year-old single dad who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table for his 7-year-old daughter Emma. Every Sunday, they had this little tradition where they'd go to the forest near their town to collect interesting rocks and pine cones. Emma loved it, and for Mark, it was the one day he could forget about unpaid bills and just be a dad. But on this particular Sunday in September, their peaceful morning turned into something straight out of a nightmare. They were about half a mile into the woods when Emma stopped dead in her tracks. She tugged on Mark's sleeve and whispered that she heard something strange. Mark didn't hear anything at first, but then he did. A muffled thumping sound, like someone banging on wood from far away. Then came the screaming, faint, desperate, and definitely human. The sound was coming from beneath their feet. Mark's heart started racing. He told Emma to stay back, and started frantically clearing away leaves and dirt with his bare hands. The screaming got louder. About 2 feet down, his fingers hit something solid wood. Someone had buried a wooden crate in the ground, and there was a person inside. Mark didn't have a shovel, didn't have any tools, just his hands and pure adrenaline. He clawed at the dirt like a madman, splinters driving into his palms as he tried to pry the wooden boards apart. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, he managed to crack open enough of the crate to see a woman inside. She was covered in dirt, her expensive-looking business suit torn and filthy. Mascara streaked down her face, but she was alive. Mark pulled her out, and she collapsed into his arms, gasping for air like someone who'd just surfaced from deep water. Emma ran over with their water bottle, and the woman drank like she hadn't seen liquid in days. Her name was Victoria Ashford, and Mark recognized her immediately. Once he got a good look at her face, everyone in town knew who Victoria Ashford was. She owned Ashford Industries, one of the biggest tech companies in the state. Her face was on billboards, in newspapers, everywhere. She was worth over $200 million, and someone had buried her alive in the woods. Victoria was shaking uncontrollably, barely able to form words. Mark wanted to call the police immediately, but Victoria grabbed his wrist with surprising strength and whispered something that made his blood run cold. "Don't call anyone yet. They'll kill my son." Mark felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just some random attack. This was a kidnapping, and it was still happening. Victoria explained between sobs that 3 days ago, 2 men in masks had broken into her mansion. They'd taken her 12-year-old son, Daniel, and told her they'd release him only after she transferred $50 million to an offshore account. But there was a sick twist. They buried her alive as insurance. If she called the police or told anyone, they'd know, and Daniel would die. They were supposed to dig her up after the money cleared, but something must have gone wrong, because they never came back. Mark's mind was spinning. Here he was, a guy who could barely afford his daughter's school supplies, suddenly responsible for a millionaire's life, and her kidnapped son. He looked at Emma, who was standing a few feet away, clutching her backpack, with wide, scared eyes. He knew he had to do something. But what? Victoria was in no condition to think straight. She'd been buried alive for 3 days with just a small air tube keeping her breathing. She was dehydrated, traumatized, and desperate. Mark made a decision. He told Victoria they needed to get her somewhere safe first, somewhere the kidnappers wouldn't think to look. His apartment was tiny, and in a rough part of town. Nobody would ever suspect a billionaire would hide there. They made their way back to his beat-up Honda, with Victoria leaning heavily on his shoulder and Emma holding her hand, trying to comfort this stranger who'd just been pulled from a grave. Back at his apartment, Mark gave Victoria clean clothes, food, and water while Emma sat quietly in the corner, scared but trying to be brave like her dad. Victoria finally calmed down enough to explain the whole situation. The kidnappers had been smart. They'd used voice changers, left no traces, and somehow knew exactly when she'd be alone at her mansion. The money had been transferred 2 days ago, but they'd never released Daniel, or come back to dig her up. Either they'd planned to kill them both from the start, or something had spooked them. Mark knew they needed help, but not from the regular police. If these guys were professional enough to pull off a kidnapping like this, they probably had connections. Then Mark remembered something. His old army buddy, Jason, worked in private security. Actually, Jason had tried to recruit Mark multiple times into his firm, but Mark always said no, because the pay was good but the hours would take him away from Emma. He called Jason, explained the situation in vague terms, and within an hour, Jason was at the apartment with 2 of his team members. What happened next was like something out of an action movie, except it was terrifyingly real. Jason's team traced the money transfer and found that it had been rerouted through 7 different accounts, but there was one of the kidnappers had logged into a gaming account from the same IP address they'd used for one of the transfers. Amateur mistake, but it was enough. They tracked the location to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Jason wanted to call the FBI at this point, but Victoria begged them to let her see if Daniel was there first. Every minute counted, and she couldn't risk the kidnappers getting spooked by a federal presence. Against his better judgment, Mark agreed to go with Jason's team. He wasn't trained for this, wasn't prepared, but he'd already saved Victoria's life once. He couldn't walk away now. They approached the warehouse at night. Through a grimy window, they could see Daniel tied to a chair in a small room, guarded by just one man. The other kidnappers were nowhere in sight. Jason's team moved in fast and silent. Within minutes, they had the guard subdued and Daniel freed. The kid was scared and exhausted, but unhurt. Turns out the other 2 kidnappers had fled the country the day before with the money, leaving their partner behind to clean up loose ends, which apparently meant killing both Victoria and Daniel once the heat died down. The police and FBI were called in after Daniel was safe, and the full story came out. The kidnappers were arrested, the money was recovered, and the news exploded with the story of the billionaire, buried alive, and the single dad who saved her. But here's where it gets really interesting. 2 weeks after everything settled down, Victoria showed up at Mark's apartment again. This time, she wasn't covered in dirt or crying. She was calm, composed, and carrying a folder. She sat down across from Mark and told him something he never expected. She'd been thinking about what happened, about how a stranger with nothing had risked everything to save her and her son when people she'd known for years couldn't be trusted. She wanted to do something for him, but not charity. She didn't want to just write him a check and walk away. Victoria offered Mark a job, not as a bodyguard or some token position, a real job as director of community outreach for Ashford Industries, with a salary that was more than he'd made in the last 5 years combined. But there was more. She wanted him to help her start a foundation that would help single parents like himself who were working multiple jobs just to survive. She'd already set aside $10 million to get it started. Mark was speechless. He'd expected maybe a reward, a thank you, something normal. Not this. Not a complete life change. He looked at Emma, who was doing homework at the kitchen table, and thought about all the times he'd had to choose between paying rent or buying her new shoes. All the birthday parties she couldn't go to because he was working. All the times he felt like he was failing her. He took the job, and 6 months later, the Ashford Foundation had helped over 300 single-parent families in their state alone, with job training, childcare assistance, and emergency funds. Mark still worked hard, but now he was home for dinner every night. Emma joined a soccer team and started taking piano lessons. And Victoria, well, she found something money could never buy. Real friends, real trust. The crazy part is that if Mark had walked a different path that Sunday, if Emma hadn't heard that thumping sound, Victoria and Daniel would both be dead. Sometimes life puts you in impossible situations not to break you, but to show you what you're really made of. And sometimes, doing the right thing when you have every reason not to changes everything. If you want to see more incredible true stories like this, the next video is already queued up for you.